What's something that's universally understood by all Americans that non-Americans just don't understand? And because they don't understand, they unrightfully judge us harshly for it? Story 1. How difficult it is to get around if you don't have a car. Not everywhere, but there are some places that are just impossible. No footpaths, bike lanes, decent public transport. Story 2. The Midwest gets all extremes when it comes to weather, and it shocks the international students every time. We get well below 0 Fahrenheit and above 100 Fahrenheit, and we get tornadoes, droughts, earthquakes, wildfires. Oh, and the Great Lakes are actually the size of a seas. They're just not salt water. Story 3. The subject of food is unhinged. Was reading comments a while back. American was talking shit about beans and toast. I'm assuming an English person replied, coming from someone who eats Snicker fucking salad. It's not often I bust out laughing at comments, but Snicker fucking salad did the trick. Before you Google, yes, it's legit LOL. Story 4. It doesn't matter what your house is made of. There's not much that will stop an EF4 or 5 tornado from absolutely destroying everything in its path. I've seen so many Europeans mock us because we should have used stronger material. They think our buildings are held together by bubblegum and prayer. Story 5. Different U.S. states can have wildly different laws, infrastructure, and cultures. You won't see people casually carrying guns to Walmart in New Jersey. Some states have no sales tax, and all states have different amounts of sales tax. And Texans have a heat tolerance that surpasses many. Story 6. Well, judging by the TikToks I see of people losing their mind at American grocery stores, I have a list of things. Nobody buys cheese in a can. I literally have never bought that and rarely see it. Non-Americans love to show it like Americans eat cheese in a can. No, we don't. We don't consider Wonder Bread to be the finest bread in all the land. If we want nice hearty bread, we will go the bakery section of a nice supermarket or a standalone bakery. In these videos, they'll say, America has the worst bread, and show a grocery aisle of sliced sandwich bread, and then compare it to their nicest artisan loaves of bread. When Americans buy anything in a container that says family size or party size, it is meant for a large group of people or a long period, or time, or both. Europeans in particular cannot seem to wrap their heads around this one, because I see people explain it to them daily, and still the next week they'll say, OMG, can you believe Americans drink a 5-gallon bottle of orange juice every day? So maybe it's them that are the issue here, because I don't think any of these things are hard to understand. And yet, Story 7. It's not all non-Americans, but for me the big one is, we're uncultured because we don't travel internationally. Like, the US is fucking massive. One day last year I got a sunburn just doing yard work while my coworker got 18 inches of snow. We're like 50 tiny countries that are tied together financially. Even culturally, we're not a monolith. The US is more like the EU, where we share a currency and can travel without a passport, but we share a language, and even that is debatable in some cases. Story 8. Why we don't all speak multiple languages. This country is massive, and in most of it, chances are that 99% of the people within 100 miles of you speak English fluently as a first or second language. The fact is that there's just not much practical reason to learn Spanish, French, German, or something else for the vast majority of us. Example. I took 3 years of Arabic in undergrad. After I graduated 18 years ago, I have used it in day-to-day life maybe 5 times. I'm now completely out of practice and barely understand any of the language at all. From a practical perspective, I'd have been better off doing something else with my time. Story 9. The size of our country is incomprehensible for Europeans. I can drive at 60 miles per hour for 7 hours and still be in the same fucking state. I had a UK salesman tell me once to just pop over to the coast to pick up a package because they couldn't ship to my state. I live in the middle of the country. I ain't popping out to the coast for a box. He was absolutely flabbergasted that I'd have to take a plane for a lot of hours to get to either side of the USA. Story 10. That when we are talking about eating foreign food, for instance, let's eat Chinese, we don't mean the cuisine currently eaten by people in those foreign countries. We mean the cuisine at restaurants in our communities founded by immigrants from those countries, often a long time ago. Fettuccine Alfredo is not Italian food. It absolutely is, in our usage and the context we are speaking about. Similarly, when we borrowed the Italian word pizza, it became an English word, and its definition changed to conform to our ideas about food. There are foods, an example, French bread pizza, that are correctly pizza when speaking English, and not pizza when speaking Italian, because although the English word pizza is a loan word from Italian, it is a different word in a different language, and means what English speakers regard as pizza. It would only be incorrect if the adjective Italian was applied, because that then specifies to use the Italian sense. Story 11. No, our toilet cubicle walls/doors in public restrooms don't go all the way to the floor or ceiling, but we do not constantly peer into stalls. I don't know how many times I've read some European comment about not wanting people to watch me go to the bathroom. For a bunch of people that seem to pride themselves on their openness regarding the human body, they sure are critical of the possibility of an inadvertent glance. Story 12. The driving. Man, if I could walk to the store or to bring my kid to school, I totally would, or work, or to the bus stop to get to these places. But my work is close, a 17-minute drive, 5.5 miles. In order to get there via public transit for my 8 a.m. start, I'd have to leave at 6:45 in the morning. And about half an hour of that would be walking. And for a good 4 months of the year, it would be walking in the dark because the sun's not up yet. There's no public transit. There's school buses, but that's different, to my kids' school. So that would be a 35-minute walk there and a 35-minute walk back if we're doing 3 miles per hour, which when my kiddo was a toddler was simply not a speed they could walk. Story 13. As an ex-international student, American high schools have a terrible reputation for having such low standards. And while it may be true that the education system is subpar, most international students are automatically put in low-level classes, especially if their grades in the U.S. don't matter back home. There are actually hard classes in American high schools. Most of us just aren't in them, so we'll come home and tell everyone how easy school was. Edit. Okay, guys, stop tooting your own horn. Story 14. I'm so sorry that I'm so fucking loud. I know that we have that reputation. It's well-deserved. I imagine Americans often travel abroad with a chip on their shoulders and can be really obnoxious. But please cut me some slack. I grew up in America. Being loud and deliberately obtuse about it is how our tribe expresses excitement and interest. We cheer and clap and talk to people, even the introverts, because people would call us weird if we didn't. Story 15. Building houses out of wood in Tornado Alley. Non-Americans don't understand that a stone, brick, or concrete house will remain standing probably, but lose its roof. Every window and door and frames and all the contents will get shredded, turned into shrapnel, and what doesn't get sucked out is embedded in the concrete walls. It'll cost more to rebuild around the shell that remains than it would cost just to clear the site of the tornado-demolished old wooden house with a new wooden house. Story 16. Europeans don't understand how big America is. For Europeans, it's nothing to live in Europe and go to France for the weekend, or be in the UK and drive to Germany for a long weekend. There are states in America that take over a day to drive through. It's multiple days to drive across the country. There's no need for a lot of Americans to travel overseas when the culture and climate is so different in the different areas of the country. Story 17. That most of us don't speak a foreign language. While I agree it's wonderful when people do, it just has extremely limited applications here. A ton of people will not be able to afford to travel internationally, or if they do, it will be brief and infrequent, not the kind of thing years of your life is worth devoting to. In Europe, where you can drive 2 hours in several directions and encounter a different language, it makes perfect sense to be multilingual. Americans encounter a ton of people whose first language isn't English, but how would you pick? We have people here from absolutely everywhere, so if you don't have a familial connection, it's just like throwing a thumbtack at a map to figure out what to even study. Story 18. In a rural North American area, a gun is a tool you use in emergencies to prevent the wildlife from eating your kids or your dog. In cities, a gun is a tool humans use to hurt each other, but depending on the area, it's the emergency backup for not ending up further down the food chain. I've mostly lived in the city, and there's cougars on all our artwork. Recently was considering asking if I could take some younger cousins camping and realized that no, that won't work because none of the adults in the group carry, and the youngest cousin is small enough to look like easy dinner for a mountain lion. Heck, go read those "What's the scariest thing that happened to you while hiking/camping?" bits. It'll include lots of encounters with North American wildlife that can easily kill a human. I got lots of chances to visit Yellowstone and Wyoming, saw all manner of large animals from the safety of the car. Only time I legit got nervous was when Dad insisted on marching through a random forest in Yellowstone trying to get to a lake to go fishing, with the plan for what if bears being limited to, "Oh, don't be stupid, we won't run into a bear," while my brain kept replaying the part of history class about Lewis and Clark's documented early encounters with grizzly bears. Story 19. We may claim the dumbest people on Earth. But remember, we also claim the smartest. These two facts can mostly explain why we are both rich beyond comprehension and poor beyond comprehension. Edit. It's the smart people at the top who created everything that makes us rich, but then hoarded it for themselves and manipulated everyone in the middle to blame the dumbest for everything. Now, the dumbest feel attacked and are fighting back against everyone else. Now, it's everyone against everyone while the rich build bunkers in faraway places. Story 20. Europe is approximately 10,180,000 SQKM, while the United States is approximately 9,833,517 SQKM, making United States 96.6% the size of Europe. The entirety of Europe. Some non-Americans believe they can come here and check out NYC, then drive on over to Hollywood for a day trip. Then they can't compute why we are okay traveling within our own country, and how we can say there are many different cultures here. Story 21. Brick homes get just as leveled of an EF3 or better hits them. Your stone house from the 1500s would fare worse than a modern wood-framed house. Getting offended that we recognize our heritage just makes us laugh at you. Most people never even see a gun. Out here in the country, however, the vast majority owns at least one. The only people I know who've been shot were shot in a war. Y'all are way more racist than we are. Most of us don't really have a reason to leave the country. Also, it's very expensive for us to leave the continent. Most of us only speak one language because we have no need to learn another one. That doesn't make us stupid. Our culture is so ubiquitous that y'all don't even notice it. Hollywood movies, jazz, rock and roll, rap, hip-hop, country, and modern pop, even in other languages, came from here. Blue jeans to shirts, athletic shoes, all American. So when y'all say the U.S. has no culture, we're laughing at you because you sound ridiculous. You can complain about U.S. hegemony as much as you want, but the modern world wouldn't exist without it. Global shipping, for example, could not happen without the U.S. Navy. Our healthcare is some of, if not the best healthcare in the world. It's just expensive. Soul food, Southern food, Tex-Mex, Italian-American food, and all the rest hits. You guys are much too snobby about food. Cold light beer on a hot day hits. Ain't nobody drinking a stout or a porter on the lake when it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit out. Cheeseburgers hit and y'all know it. Story 22. How big America is. I don't think they understand that you can drive for 10 hours in Texas and still be in Texas. Like, for instance, it's a 45-minute drive from the UK to Germany and France, 45 minutes to an American. That's such a short drive to a whole other country. But they think it's normal. So when they see Americans driving everywhere, they think it's because we don't want to walk, when in reality it's because everything is so far apart. A 5-minute drive is like an hour walking distance. Story 23. A lot of Americans live in cities' suburbs, but there are vast areas of rural spaces in the USA. It's common to have a 45-minute drive to a grocery store or gas station. There might be one sheriff for 100s of square miles, and wild animals. Firearms and self-sufficiency aren't always just for ego. They're a part of making a lifestyle work in places that are surrounded by comparative wilderness. Story 24. When an American says something like, "I'm Italian" or "I'm Irish," there's a "American" that is part of the phrase that's left unsaid, because we all already know we are American. It's part of our culture to identify where our ancestors came from, a leftover from the mass immigrations of the late early 1900s. At that time, a lot of new immigrants stuck together in communities. You can see this as NYC and many other places where there's the old Finnish neighborhood or Chinatown. For many of us, we are only 3 or 4 generations removed from these cultures, and our families have kept some of the holiday traditions and foods, hence it being part of our identity. It's closely tied to family. Do some Americans take it too far and get real obnoxious about it, especially to Europeans who are from those countries? Definitely. I just keep seeing baffled Europeans thinking Americans believe they are Italian/Irish/German citizens or something because our grandparents were. Story 25. I think the fact that we don't have trains connecting every town running multiple times an hour, I think a lot of non-Americans underestimate the size of the country, which makes a European-style train network more difficult. I'm not saying we shouldn't strive to have a better train network, but Europeans underestimate the distance. They plan a week trip and hope to hit 7 western states. It takes longer than they think to go from, for instance, Texas and California. Story 26. So many people get salty about our greeting customs or confused. "Hi, how are you?" is an automatic greeting that represents basic politeness. No, it isn't really an actual question, but it's not because we are uncaring assholes. It's just a custom. Acceptable responses are fine, thanks, how are you? Doing okay, thanks. Hanging in there? Well, I'm here. Great, thanks. I could be better, but thanks for asking. Depending on the situation, your reply can be just as automatic and passing, or a little opportunity to joke or interact for a brief moment. It's a social pleasantry that shows I'm acknowledging the other person before getting down to business. Other cultures have different greeting customs, and those are okay too. Our particular custom is not a reflection on an uncaring person or culture. In fact, I have found Americans to be very friendly, genuinely courteous and caring. Our manners may be crude to others' cultures, but I still find us to have good intentions and try to express politeness and courtesy in the ways that we understand them. Story 27. That we consider North America and South America to be separate continents and never refer to either continent as just America. The closest thing would be referring to both continent as the Americas, plural. When we say we're from America, we're not being dicks and saying that the whole or both continents belong to us. We're saying we're from the United States of America because that is the only place we call America in our dialect of English and according to the classification of continents that we use. In a lot of places in the world, it is still common to group North-South America together as one continent, and I've met people who get testy when I just said I was from America. Story 28. They don't understand why many Americans never leave their country. Most Americans travel for some sort of natural feature, and we generally don't have to leave the country for that. Rolling mountains, we have Appalachia, spiky mountains, the Rockies, desert, the Southwest, the ocean. We have everything from rocky coastlines to tropical beaches. A big city, we have a plethora to choose from. Unless there's something very specific that isn't in the U.S., like castles or actual old medieval towns, we generally can get most of our trip needs. Story 29, how big the USA is. So many criticism ultimately boil down to this. We're uncultured? The nearest countries to us are still very far for most people and aren't very different. We're not well-traveled? Again, other countries are super far away. $600 plus flight across an ocean to Europe or Asia plus every other travel abroad expense isn't enticing when we have our own hundreds of beautiful landscapes and cities with unique cultures to visit. We only speak English? Lots of us speak Spanish, but most Americans can go their whole lives without needing another language ever. Even when we travel, English is so common that it's not worth the effort to learn a whole second language for a 2-week trip. So many more. Story 30. Non-Americans are very condescending about people having not traveled to another country. Unless you live near the border of Canada or Mexico, you can drive for 18 hours and still be in the country. We travel in a radius around us, or take vacations within the country, but we can see plenty without ever leaving. Also, people are very unpleasant because we're fascinated with genealogy. Everyone moved around so much in my parents' and grandparents' generation, we basically have no family connection. I have relatives I've never met or spoke to on the phone because they live in a state I've never been to. We don't have that connection of knowing my family for 10 generations is from this immediate area or going to the same school as our parents.